On the heels of the Oxford High School mass shooting in Michigan, a new study by the Government Office of Accountability found increase in school violence during the Trump administration. Now, data from the 2015 school year, from 2015 to 2018 specifically, tells us there was a 97% increase in attacks with weapons, hate crimes grew by 81%, and sexual assaults rose by 17%. Now, according to Everytown Research and Policy, there have been 149 gun shootings in schools this year alone, leaving 32 dead and 94 injured. From Baltimore, Maryland, joining us is Khalilah Harris from the Center for American Progress, the Managing Director for K-12 Education Policy. Khalilah, thank you so much for joining us here on Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Thanks for having me.
Now, it's so easy to blame Donald Trump for all of the bad things happening in the United States, and quite honestly, I'm satisfied doing that and having us all go home. But beyond that, what is it that's happening in our educational climate that is leading to an uptick, if it is indeed an uptick, in the violence that we're seeing in school settings?
I think it's fair to say that it's an uptick, and I think it's also fair to blame Donald Trump. What we know is that family members are a part of the community, just as we saw in Michigan, that the parents of that young man in some ways were complicit in his behavior. And, you know, the broader society reflects what's happening in schools, and schools reflect what's happening in the broader society. And since the Trump administration, the increase in vitriol, incidences like Charlottesville, all the way through to the January 6th insurrection. Those people have children, and they go to school every day with the belief systems in their households. So it's not a surprise at all.
You talk about that households and communities represent schools, schools represent communities. It seems there's a national language of violence. We know that if nothing else, look at all of the money that we try to fight for everything from healthcare to mental health and elder care, but we have tons of money for defense, violence. So could it perhaps just be a byproduct of we are a violent society, of violent people, and so we shouldn't expect anything different from our children?
First of all, we should expect something different from our children. It is certainly the case that if they're exposed to violence, or if violence is glorified, particularly from the highest office in our nation, that children are going to get a message it's okay to attack one another to resolve their differences. But, you know, I'm a member of Gen X. You know, we say things like, you know, the kids today, they're ready to pull a gun, when back in the day we would shoot the fair one, right? We would be willing to have a fist fight and the beef and be done with it. But, you know, there are a lot of things that are happening to young people today that weren't happening when I was growing up, whether it be the back-to-back recessions, the pandemic, frankly, kickback from the Obama administration. We saw a number of people feeling like they wanted to, quote unquote, take their country back. And again, those messages filter down to the children. But I do think we are seeing a level of violence that is unacceptable in our schools. And we also know that that can then translate into school hardening, where typically children who are Black and Indigenous and other Black people of color end up in situations where they are now over-policed, or law enforcement is flooding their schools, yet there's not evidence that those particular communities are where we're seeing mass shootings or this heightened level of violence. So we want to be mindful of what's happening there, because the children should not be expected to just, you know, fight it out in the schoolhouse. That should be a safe space for them to come to get their learning.
I was just going to ask you that. We've seen reports that say there's teen suicide attempts during the pandemic have gone up 4% for boys, 50% for young women. Is there anything that we can see or pull from the data that may tell us what's happening unique to perhaps sexual identity or gender, perhaps unique to race or ethnicity, to culture, to religion? Anything about the ways that violence are affecting particular groups differently?
It really is hard to pull that out, but right now the U.S. Department of Education is preparing to do another civil rights data collection. And what we saw during the Obama administration was a lot of focus on dismantling the school-to-prison pipeline, providing guidance for districts to address bullying. But then in the Trump administration, we saw a lot of that being backpedaled. And there were fewer reports to the Office for Civil Rights asking for enforcement of children's civil rights, whether it be through Title IX for our trans students or any of the other civil rights that our students have access to. So, when we see increased violence, it is very difficult to do a good comparison because we don't have good data during that time. What we will have is a new data collection that'll allow us to look in and see what type of bullying is happening. There may be a collection of more data about faith-based discrimination. And we know during the pandemic and at the very beginning we had a lot of anti-Asian hate. There's this perpetual disrespect for Muslim communities or brown people who some people perceive to be Muslims. So we'll be able to take a look at that and really do some intervention as we have a new administration that seems more amenable to protecting the civil rights of children, particularly under Catherine Lehman's leadership, who was in office during the Obama administration as well, trying to drive that change around school discipline and anti-bullying.
I appreciate you pointing to the various Department of Education because with respect to Secretary Duncan, we'll put him to the side for a second. We know this with Secretary John King and with Secretary Miguel Cardona, that there are folks who come from some of these communities that are more attuned and attentive to it, and they're now collecting the data. But how difficult is it? Because this data and investigation you're alluding to does take time to let it happen and then to do studies and then to aggregate it and pull out the information. But if each successive secretary is not as focused on the data as the one prior to them were, does that undermine and interrupt? And if so, we're not able to then make the necessary changes for our young people that it seems to make. Is that a fair read on that, or am I misreading?
That is fair, and elections matter. And so the reason we're going to have a little bit of difficulty in the next data collection is because the previous administration, Secretary DeVos, was not prioritizing that data collection and frankly dismantled the Office for Civil Rights. And there weren't enough people to investigate those cases. So two things need to happen. There needs to be guidance that is immediate about anti-bullying and about the epidemic of violence in our schools. But we must have a civil rights data collection so that we can do some comparative analysis with the data that you're talking about over time and really attack the issue and not just make up haphazard policies, but we want to make sure that the policies are targeting the issues and that we make sure that there is funding flowing to schools to support social emotional learning, increased numbers of school counselors and mental health therapists, but also the communities around the schools cannot be absolved from responsibility and also require high levels of support. In the American Rescue Plan, dollars have gone to school districts to support some of that increased mental health access, but we have to do a whole lot more. And access to public health care, is also a critical component here. So all of those things go together to make sure our children are going to schools where they should not expect violence, where they should not expect stabbings, they should not expect someone to pull out a gun that their parents gave them a week before and just shoot the first people that they see. That really should not be indicative of the country we live in, but unfortunately it has been, whether it be Sandy Hook or Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. We thought those things would result in greater policies that support our children, and unfortunately it hasn't. People use that to want to increase budgets around policing and law enforcement instead of budgets around providing quality mental health and quality school environments.
What do you say, Ms. Harris, to those critics who would just oversimplify this and say perhaps our kids are just too soft, they don't know how to deal with the realities of life, and they turn to violence as an answer, and that's their fault? They need to have a more difficult or stronger constitution to be able to persevere through these things without affecting harm on their classmates.
That is really an elementary way to describe the issue. Our children are brilliant. They're dealing with things that we had not had to deal with. We have the internet and we have bullying that's easier to go under the wire and can be much more intensified. We also know that, to your earlier point, the Office for Civil Rights takes a process, right, in order to enforce those policies and to investigate a claim. But we also know that the data shows when reports of racism and race-based hate crimes, hate crimes related to sexual orientation, that they happen over and over and over before a claim is made. And that is a part of the problem. So we really need to drill down to state level offices, to district level offices, and hold them accountable for making sure that our children are being engaged around how to be more resilient, how to problem solve, how to participate in restorative practice, and not just connected to any jargon, but really develop relationships with our children. And we know that with the pandemic, there was a break in that kind of relationship building, but we need to make sure there are systems in place that we don't just say, okay, now we can do all virtual schooling. Our children need the teachers who know them well, who live in their communities, to be able to support them. And sometimes that's the bus driver, sometimes that's the custodian, sometimes it's the office manager, and we cannot negate that. So we want to make sure that we are providing these holistic spaces with resources so children can work through the myriad of issues that they're facing today that we frankly did not. And there are also many more guns on the street than there were when I was younger. And that is another issue. So all of those things have to come together.
Ms. Harris, we're going to get out of here, but folks who might have found what you said so insightful and enlightening and they want to hear what you have to say more often, how can they find, follow, tweet, talk to any of the things that you talk to us with?
Absolutely. I am at Ed2Be-Free, ED, the number 2, and Be Free on every social media outlet, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can find me there, and I'm happy to continue the discussion.
And Ms. Harris, on a personal note, you and I both are in solidarity with our friends at the Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. So shout out to our guy, Davon Love and Adam and Lawrence and the whole team over there. Those are all my folks back home in West Baltimore. Ms. Harris, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us here on Roland Martin Unfiltered.
All right, take care.
Back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
Time to be smart.
Roland Martin's doing this every day.
Oh, no punches!
Thank you, Roland Martin, for always giving voice to the issues.
Look for Roland Martin in the whirlwind, to quote Marcus Garvey again.
The video looks phenomenal, so I'm really excited to see it on my big screen.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
I got to defer to the brilliance of Dr. Carr and to the brilliance of the Black Star Network.
I am rolling with Roland all the way. Honored to be on a show that you own. A black man owns the show.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
I'm real revolutionary right now. Roland was amazing on there.
Stay black. I love y'all.
I can't commend you enough about this platform that you've created for us to be able to share who we are, what we're doing in the world, and the impact that we're having.
Let's be smart. Bring your eyeballs home.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared. You dig?